It happened at night, without warning. A mountainside collapsed into the reservoir, and the water rose instantly, far higher than any calculation allowed. The dam held. The valley did not. By morning, thousands were dead, and the mistake was irreversible. The story now rewinds, away from the moment of destruction, back to a country rebuilding itself from the ruins of war. In the years following the Second World War, Italy stood at a crossroads. Much of its infrastructure had been damaged or destroyed. Its economy was fragile. Energy demand was rising fast, driven by industrial recovery, urban growth, and the promise of modernization. Across the country, hydroelectric power emerged as a solution that seemed almost ideal. The Alps offered steep valleys, fast-moving rivers, and enormous elevation changes, natural conditions perfectly suited for large-scale energy production. Harnessing water meant electricity, employment, and national renewal. It was within this context that attention turned to a remote valley in the Dolomite Alps, carved by the Vajont River. Narrow, steep-sided, and deeply incised into the mountains, the gorge appeared tailor-made for a dam of unprecedented scale. Engineers envisioned a structure that would not merely block a river, but dominate the landscape. An audacious statement of technical mastery over nature. Construction began on what would become one of the tallest concrete arch dams in the world. Rising more than 260 meters from its foundation, the dam was designed to curve gently upstream, transferring immense water pressure into the solid rock walls of the canyon itself. This was not brute force engineering. It was precision engineering. Lean, efficient, mathematically elegant. Every curve, every angle was calculated to exacting standards. On paper, the design was exceptional. The concrete arch dam was considered among the safest forms of dam construction, particularly in narrow gorges like the Vajont. Unlike gravity dams that rely on sheer mass, an arch dam works by redirecting force outward into the canyon walls. If those walls are strong, the dam becomes extraordinarily resilient. And early assessments suggested they were. As construction progressed through the 1950s, the dam drew admiration from engineers across Europe. It was a technical showpiece, frequently cited as evidence of Italy's engineering sophistication. When the final pour of concrete was completed, the structure stood immaculate, smooth, symmetrical, and imposing. It appeared immovable, unyielding, permanent. The surrounding mountain, Monte Toc, rose steeply above the future reservoir on the southern side of the valley. From a distance, it seemed solid and unremarkable. Just another massive alpine slope layered with forest and rock. Its name, derived from local dialect, loosely translated to the Rotten Mountain. But such labels were common in mountainous regions and not necessarily viewed as scientific warnings. Geologically, the mountain was complex. Layers of limestone and marl were stacked at angles, shaped by millions of years of tectonic movement. Beneath the surface lay ancient landslide deposits, evidence that parts of the mountain had moved long before modern records existed. But these features were subtle, difficult to interpret, and not fully understood at the time. To most observers, Monte Toc looked stable enough. During initial testing phases, the dam performed exactly as expected. Instruments embedded in the structure registered no abnormal stress. Concrete expansion and contraction fell within predicted limits. Engineers monitored pressure, deformation, and seepage, and found nothing alarming. From a structural standpoint, the dam was a success. As the reservoir slowly began to fill, The water level rose behind the dam, transforming the narrow valley into a deep, elongated lake. The change was dramatic but gradual. Villages nearby watched the landscape reshape itself over months and years. What had once been a river became a vast body of still water reflecting the mountains above. For those overseeing the project, the reservoir symbolized controlled power. Water levels were adjusted carefully. Technical reports emphasized manageability. The belief took hold that this was a system fully understood, fully governed by human decision-making. Downstream, life continued largely unchanged. Towns such as Longarone, nestled in the Piave Valley, carried on with daily routines. Shops opened each morning. Children attended school. Farmers tended fields. The dam loomed far above them, visible but distant, a quiet presence rather than an immediate concern. Officials repeatedly reassured local populations of the dam's safety. The structure, they explained, was among the strongest ever built. It had been designed to withstand forces far greater than any it would encounter. Even if something unexpected occurred, they claimed, the dam itself would hold. This distinction between the strength of the dam and the behavior of the environment was rarely emphasized. At the time, confidence in large-scale engineering was widespread, not just in Italy, but across the industrialized world. Massive infrastructure projects were symbols of progress. Dams, bridges, and power plants were seen as evidence that human ingenuity could overcome natural limitations. Risk was acknowledged, but often framed as something that could be calculated, managed, and contained. Crucially, that confidence focused almost entirely on the structure itself. The dam was tested. The dam was measured. The dam was monitored. It became the central object of analysis, the focal point of safety assessments and public messaging. The surrounding geology, complex, variable, and far less predictable, was treated as a secondary concern, something that could be accommodated rather than questioned. This perspective shaped decisions at every level. As long as the concrete held, as long as instruments embedded in the dam reported normal readings, the system was considered safe. The possibility that the mountain above the reservoir could behave dynamically, that it could respond to water pressure in sudden, non-linear ways, was not fully integrated into risk calculations. Modern geoscience now recognizes this as a critical blind spot. Natural systems do not respond gradually or predictably simply because engineers expect them to. Slopes that appear stable can fail catastrophically once thresholds are crossed. Subsurface layers, invisible from the surface, can act as planes of weakness. Water infiltration can transform friction into motion. But at the time, these processes were poorly understood and often underestimated. The Vajont project moved forward under the assumption that engineering control equaled environmental control. The dam's flawless performance reinforced that belief. Each successful test, each incremental rise in water level, seemed to confirm that the system was behaving as planned. Yet beneath the surface, literally and figuratively, the true relationship between water, rock, and gravity remained only partially understood. This was the foundation upon which the disaster was built. Not negligence in construction, not careless design, but a profound overconfidence in what technology alone could guarantee. A belief that strength could substitute for understanding. A belief that nature, once measured and modeled, would remain obedient. In the shadow of the dam, the mountain waited, and slowly, Almost imperceptibly, the conditions for catastrophe were taking shape. As the reservoir behind the dam begins to fill, the changes are not dramatic at first. They are quiet, incremental, easy to dismiss if one is not looking closely. On the steep southern slope of the valley, hairline fractures appear in the ground. At first, they resemble ordinary surface cracks, the kind commonly found on alpine terrain shaped by frost and erosion. But over time, these cracks lengthen. They widen. Some stretch for hundreds of meters across the mountainside. Trees begin to lean at unnatural angles. Stone retaining walls warp and separate. Sections of mountain roads subtly buckle, their once straight lines bending as if pulled from below. To the untrained eye, these changes seem minor, isolated irregularities in a rugged landscape. But to geologists and local residents who have lived with the mountain for generations, they signal something far more troubling. Instruments installed around the reservoir confirm what the surface is already revealing. Precision markers embedded in the slope show measurable movement, slow but consistent, millimeters per day, then centimeters per month. The mountain is not static. It is shifting as a single massive body. This movement is not random. It follows a distinct boundary buried deep beneath the surface, an ancient landslide plain formed thousands of years earlier. Long before the dam existed, a vast section of Monte Toc had detached and slid partially downslope, eventually stabilizing in a precarious equilibrium. That equilibrium is now being disturbed. As the water level in the reservoir rises, water begins to seep into fractures in the rock. It penetrates porous limestone layers and collects along seams of clay and marl, materials known to weaken dramatically when saturated. The infiltrating water increases pore pressure, reducing friction along the buried slip surface. In geological terms, the mountain is being lubricated. Geologists involved in monitoring the site recognize the danger. Reports document accelerating slope movement correlated with changes in reservoir level. Some recommend extreme caution. Others warn that the entire mountainside represents a single, coherent landslide mass, one capable of sudden, catastrophic failure. Local residents voice their fears as well. Farmers describe hearing deep cracking sounds at night. Shepherds report ground shifting beneath their feet. These accounts, though anecdotal, align with measured data. The mountain is responding to the reservoir in real time. Within the operating company and among government officials, these warnings are discussed, but rarely acted upon decisively. Engineers overseeing the project acknowledge that the slope is moving. That much is undeniable, but they interpret the movement through the lens of control. Their calculations suggest that by carefully managing the water level, raising it slowly, lowering it when movement accelerates, they can stabilize the slope. The belief takes hold that the landslide can be trained into a controlled, gradual slide rather than a sudden collapse. This assumption becomes central to decision-making. At the time, prevailing engineering models treat landslides as relatively predictable phenomena. Gradual movement is expected to continue gradually. Sudden acceleration is considered unlikely, unless triggered by extreme external forces, such as earthquakes or intense rainfall. The possibility that a slope could transition abruptly from slow creep to catastrophic failure without warning is not yet fully understood. To test their control strategy, operators deliberately vary the reservoir level. When movement speeds up, they lower the water. When it slows, they raise it again. For a time, this approach appears to work. The slope responds, decelerating when water levels drop. Each apparent success reinforces confidence that the system is manageable. But beneath the surface, a dangerous transformation is underway. Every cycle of filling and drawdown weakens the internal structure of the mountain. Water does not simply drain away when levels fall. It remains trapped within fractures and clay layers, permanently altering the mechanical properties of the rock mass. Friction decreases. Cohesion is lost. The landslide body becomes increasingly unstable, even when surface movement temporarily slows. Modern geotechnical analysis makes this clear. The operators are not stabilizing the mountain. They are progressively priming it for failure. Over the following months, the rate of movement increases. What was once measured in millimeters per day becomes centimeters, then teens of centimeters. Entire sections of the slope begin to move as a single unit, confirming fears that this is not a collection of small landslides, but one enormous mass, hundreds of meters thick and kilometers wide. The volume involved is staggering. Estimates suggest that more than 250 million cubic meters of rock are slowly detaching from the mountain. If released suddenly, it would rank among the largest landslides in recorded history. Yet operations continue. From an administrative standpoint, halting the project is difficult. The dam represents a massive financial investment and a symbol of national achievement. Admitting the site is fundamentally unsafe would have economic and political consequences. There is also the prevailing belief that the dam itself, the concrete structure, is not at risk. Even if a landslide occurs, it is assumed the dam will survive. This assumption is tragically incomplete. The danger does not lie in the dam collapsing. It lies in the water. As the landslide mass accelerates, it threatens to displace the entire reservoir almost instantaneously. Engineers estimate potential wave heights, but their models underestimate the velocity and coherence of the moving rock. They imagine a slumping slide, not a near vertical plunge. They imagine displacement over minutes, not seconds. By late summer, movement rates reach alarming levels, up to several centimeters per hour. Monitoring teams work around the clock, documenting deformation with growing unease. Emergency lowering of the reservoir is ordered, but the response comes too late. The mountain no longer reacts proportionally. Its motion has entered a runaway phase. At this point, modern scientists agree. The outcome is no longer preventable. The system has crossed a threshold. The landslide mass behaves like a rigid block, accelerating under its own weight. Gravity takes over. Friction can no longer hold it in place. Water pressure has done its work. What remains is only a matter of timing. The escalating crisis reveals a fundamental mismatch between human timescales and geological processes. Engineers work in days, weeks, and operating schedules. Mountains respond in non-linear jumps, long periods of apparent stability, followed by sudden, irreversible collapse. This gap in understanding proves fatal. As the reservoir level stabilizes temporarily, some believe the worst has passed. But the mountain tells a different story. Cracks continue to widen. Monitoring markers shift visibly within hours. The slope emits deep, resonant noises. Sounds later described by witnesses as resembling thunder rolling underground. The race between human control and geological inevitability is nearly over. Modern analysis leaves little ambiguity. Once the landslide reached this stage, no intervention available at the time could have stopped it. The failure was no longer a question of engineering skill, but of fundamental natural limits that had already been exceeded. The mountain was moving as a single body, and soon it would move all at once. The final movement begins without ceremony, without alarms, and without time to react. It is night. The valley is dark and quiet, broken only by the low hum of water moving through turbines far below. On the southern flank of Monte Toc, the mountain that has been shifting for months reaches a critical point. The internal strength that once held it together is gone. Friction along the buried clay layers has collapsed. Gravity, uninterrupted at last, takes control. In a matter of seconds, an enormous section of the mountain detaches. Approximately 270 million cubic meters of rock, an entire mountainside, begins to slide as a single coherent mass. This is not a gradual slump or a cascading rockfall. It is a massive block, kilometers wide and hundreds of meters thick, accelerating with terrifying efficiency. Estimates suggest speeds approaching 30 meters per second, faster than many vehicles travel on a highway. There is no explosion, no fire, only an overwhelming deep roar as the mountain collapses into motion. The landslide plunges directly into the reservoir below. The impact is immediate and catastrophic. Almost the entire volume of the lake is displaced in seconds, forced violently upward and outward by the sudden intrusion of rock. Water does not behave gently when displaced at this scale. It behaves like a weapon. A colossal wave forms instantly, far higher than any scenario engineers had modeled. The water surges vertically up the opposite valley wall, climbing hundreds of meters, stripping soil, trees, and rock from the mountainside as if they were weightless. The wave then turns outward, racing toward the dam. The dam itself holds. The concrete arch, engineered to redirect pressure into the canyon walls, performs exactly as designed. It does not crack. It does not shift. It remains standing, a silent witness to the disaster unfolding around it. But the dam was never designed to contain a wave of this magnitude. Water overtops the crest in a single, overwhelming surge. An estimated 25 to 30 million cubic meters of water spill over the top, plunging into the narrow gorge below. The falling water carries debris, trees, soil, rock fragments, accelerating as it funnels through the confined valley. What follows is not a flood in the conventional sense. It is a hydrodynamic blast. The wave compresses as it descends, gaining speed and destructive power. Within seconds, it is traveling at velocities capable of obliterating reinforced structures. The sound alone, described later by survivors as a continuous thunder, precedes the water itself. Downstream towns have no warning. There are no sirens, no emergency broadcasts, no time to flee. The wave arrives in darkness, faster than human perception can process. Entire neighborhoods are struck simultaneously. Buildings collapse from the force of impact. Concrete walls disintegrate. Streets are erased beneath a slurry of water, mud, and debris. In Longarone, the town closest to the valley's mouth, destruction is nearly absolute. Multi-story buildings are flattened. Homes are torn from their foundations and carried hundreds of meters downstream. People asleep in their beds are killed instantly. Those who are awake have seconds, if that, to comprehend what is happening. The water does not linger. It passes through with devastating efficiency, leaving behind a landscape that no longer resembles a town. Where streets once ran, there is bare earth. Where buildings stood, there is silence. Other villages downstream are struck as well, though with slightly less force. Even so, the damage is catastrophic. Entire communities are partially or completely destroyed. Bridges collapse. Farmland is buried. The river valley is transformed beyond recognition. Within minutes, it is over. An estimated 2,000 people are dead. The cause is not structural failure. The dam remains intact above the reservoir, stark and unbroken. The cause is the sudden displacement of water on a scale that no downstream settlement could survive. The energy released rivals that of a major natural disaster, concentrated into a narrow corridor with lethal precision. In the immediate aftermath, confusion dominates. Survivors emerge from the darkness, injured and disoriented, searching for family members who no longer exist. Rescue efforts are hampered by destroyed roads, unstable ground, and the sheer extent of devastation. Entire areas are inaccessible. Above the valley, the reservoir itself is unrecognizable. Where water once filled the gorge, there is now a vast mound of rock, the landslide mass, rising hundreds of meters high. The lake is effectively gone, replaced by stone. The mountain has not merely shifted, it has permanently rewritten the geography of the region. At the dam, observers confront a surreal sight. The structure stands untouched, illuminated against the night sky, while devastation stretches endlessly below it. This contrast becomes one of the most haunting images of the disaster. A perfect structure presiding over total destruction. From a scientific perspective, the event confirms the worst fears that had been raised but not fully accepted. The landslide behaved as a rigid block, not a disintegrating mass. Its velocity was far higher than anticipated. The resulting wave exceeded all design assumptions by an order of magnitude. Modern analysis shows that once the landslide began, no human intervention could have altered the outcome. The forces involved were simply too large. The energy released was equivalent to millions of tons of TNT, expressed not through fire or blast, but through water accelerated by gravity and confinement. For those in the valley, the distinction is meaningless. The result is the same. The catastrophe unfolds in near silence afterward. No fires burn. No secondary explosions follow. Just darkness, broken only by the sound of water settling and debris shifting in the ruined valley. By dawn, the scale of the disaster becomes visible. Our once inhabited landscape has been erased in minutes. Families are gone. Communities no longer exist. The valley itself has been fundamentally altered. The event is total, sudden, and irreversible. It is also profoundly unsettling in its implications. The dam did not fail. The engineering calculations were, in many respects, correct. And yet, thousands are dead. The disaster exposes a critical truth that modern engineering would come to emphasize more strongly in the decades that follow. Safety cannot be measured solely by the strength of structures. It must account for the full behavior of the natural systems they interact with. On that night, the mountain asserted that reality with overwhelming force, and the valley paid the price. When the water finally recedes and the noise fades, an unsettling stillness settles over the valley. At the head of the gorge, the dam remains standing, unbroken, immovable, exactly as it was designed to be. Its smooth concrete face rises above a landscape that no longer resembles the one it once commanded. Where a deep reservoir had existed, there is now a vast wall of rock, the frozen remains of the landslide that erased entire communities below. The image is profoundly disturbing. A flawless structure presiding over devastation. In the days that follow, rescue teams search the ruins downstream. Their efforts are limited not by will, but by reality. Many victims are never recovered. Entire families have vanished without trace. Towns that once held thousands are reduced to debris fields and bare earth. For survivors, the loss is not only personal but existential. The loss of place, history, and community. Italy mourns. The disaster shocks the nation and draws international attention. But grief is quickly joined by questions. How could this have happened? How could one of the most advanced engineering projects in Europe result in such overwhelming loss of life? Investigations begin almost immediately. What they uncover is deeply troubling. Official inquiries, technical reviews, and later court proceedings establish that the Vajont disaster was not an unpredictable act of nature. The geological instability of Monte Toc had been identified years earlier. Reports documented ancient landslide deposits. Monitoring instruments recorded accelerating slope movement. Engineers knew the mountain was moving. Warnings were issued by geologists, by local observers, by internal reports that flagged increasing risk. These warnings were not ignored entirely, but they were consistently downplayed. Mitigation strategies focused on managing symptoms rather than confronting the underlying hazard. The possibility of a catastrophic, rapid landslide was acknowledged in theory, but treated as unlikely in practice. The central failure was not a lack of intelligence or technical skill. It was a failure of judgment. The dam itself performed exactly as engineered. Its survival becomes one of the most haunting aspects of the disaster. The structure did not collapse. The concrete did not crack. The calculations governing its strength were correct, but those calculations addressed only part of the system. What the project failed to fully account for was the mountain. Investigators conclude that decision-makers placed excessive confidence in the dam as an object, its materials, its geometry, its structural integrity, while underestimating the complexity and unpredictability of the geological environment holding back the water. The surrounding landscape was treated as a static backdrop, not as an active, evolving system capable of catastrophic change. This distinction proves fatal. In the years that follow, legal responsibility is assigned. Several officials and engineers are prosecuted and convicted for negligence and failure to act on known risks. These proceedings do not undo the loss, but they establish a crucial precedent that accountability in large-scale engineering projects extends beyond structural soundness to encompass environmental understanding and ethical responsibility. The Vajont disaster becomes a watershed moment in engineering history. Globally, it forces a reevaluation of how dams and large infrastructure projects more broadly are designed, assessed, and approved. Geological investigations are no longer treated as preliminary formalities, but as central components of risk analysis. The concept of system safety gains prominence. The understanding that structures, environments, and human decisions form an inseparable whole. Dam safety standards are revised worldwide. Greater emphasis is placed on slope stability, reservoir-induced landslides, and long-term monitoring. Conservative assumptions replace optimistic ones. Worst-case scenarios, once considered theoretical, are taken seriously. Perhaps most importantly, the disaster reshapes professional ethics. Engineering is no longer framed solely as a problem of technical optimization, but as a discipline with moral consequences. The obligation to act on uncomfortable data, to slow projects, to challenge authority, to prioritize human life over economic or political pressure, becomes a defining principle taught to future generations of engineers and geoscientists. In academic circles, Vajont becomes a case study taught not only for what went wrong, but for why warnings failed to alter decisions. Psychologists, sociologists, and risk analysts examine the disaster through the lens of organizational behavior. They identify familiar patterns, confirmation bias, institutional momentum, and the normalization of deviance, where repeated success masks escalating danger. The lessons extend far beyond dams. They apply to nuclear power plants, chemical facilities, spaceflight programs, and modern megaprojects of every kind. Vajont demonstrates that catastrophic failure often arises not from a single mistake, but from a sequence of rational decisions made within a flawed framework of assumptions. Today, the site stands as a place of memory and reflection. The dam remains silent and imposing. The landslide mass is still there, a permanent scar on the mountain. Memorials mark where towns once stood. Survivors and descendants return not only to remember the dead, but to bear witness to a lesson paid for at immense human cost. Modern scientists continue to study the event using advanced modeling and geological analysis. Their conclusions are consistent. Once the landslide reached its final stage, the outcome was inevitable. But long before that moment, intervention was possible. The disaster was not caused by ignorance of risk, but by the failure to act decisively on what was already known. This is why Vajont is remembered as one of the deadliest man-made disasters in history. Not because technology failed, but because its limits were ignored. The dam was strong, the calculations were precise, the ambition was sincere. Yet none of that mattered when confronted with a natural system that had been misunderstood and underestimated. Vajont endures as a warning carved into stone and memory, that human authority over nature is conditional, never absolute. That progress achieved without humility carries consequences beyond prediction, and that the true measure of engineering success is not what can be built, but what must not be risked. If this story helped you understand how one decision can change history, consider supporting the channel. Like the video, subscribe for more in-depth historical investigations, and share this story so its lessons are not forgotten.